Eating more protein is not going to help you lose weight or lose fat. Why is this so? Well, number one, at the end of the day, a calorie is just a calorie. And if it's in excess of what your daily requirement needs, your resting metabolic rate, how many calories your body burns on a daily basis, then you're going to store it as fat. Anything in excess, you will store as fat. Now, if you're strength training and you need more protein because you're building muscle because of the breakdown that you've had from the exercise stimulus, then eating more protein is going to help you. If for whatever reason you might have insulin resistance or some other problem, more protein could help. But again, if you're not looking at the amount of calories in total, if it's I eat the same amount and then I just add more protein and I don't take away some food, it's not going to matter. So the insulin sensitivity and things still needs to be in a deficit. If you're going to do keto, it still needs to be in this deficit. Or you have to completely get rid of the carbohydrates in general. Or you have to do fasting, and then you can go back and forth. So what I'm talking about mainly is eating protein and the body and its requirements. At the end of the day, calorie is just a calorie. So, like I said, if you're strength training, you need that. You need the protein for the amino acids so that you can build the muscle because you just broke it down. Doug McGuff makes a great analogy to this, kind of like a corporation, right? They're got to make budget cuts, right? What's priority? Okay. Well, in our body, if we're not strength training, muscle isn't a priority. Bone and nervous system tissue, they're not a priority. Fat isn't a is a priority for us. All right. They're not really discriminatory between themselves. The body doesn't really care if it loses muscle, it loses bone, it loses nervous tissue, or it loses fat, because there's no demand on it to keep the muscle or keep the bone because of that strength training or because of that physical activity. So if you don't do any physical activity, your body's gonna kind of burn fat and muscle together. But if you strength train and there's a demand on the body, if they're a high priority, to keep the muscle on, to keep the skeleton nice and strong, to keep the nervous system flowing, right? The body doesn't need the fat, okay? If you're strength training, that's why it's so important to strength train when you diet, so that you can keep and preserve that muscle tissue, and you're gonna end up increasing that overall metabolic rate because your muscle tissue is higher. If your muscle tissue burns more calories than fat tissue. So when it comes to eating protein, what most diets want you to do is decrease the carbs, decrease the fats, and increase the protein. But again, this is going to be useless unless if you're strength training. When you do strength training, it's going to be a necessity. And think about what I just said. Because your body's prioritizing muscle, that protein that you're eating is going to definitely end up going to the muscle, because your demand for your body needs those amino acids to build it back up. But when you're losing the weight, it's going to also preserve. So people often talk about, hey, you can't, lose weight and build muscle at the same time. Well, just think about the priorities in the body. If I'm strength training, lifting weight, and I'm not giving it enough food, the stimulus on the body is, hey, we're doing some damage to the body. We need to repair this tissue. We need to keep it strong because of this threat. Your body only cares about survival. That threat on the body is a demand. We have to preserve, all right? If you're in a calorie deficit, the survival mechanism is, hey, we need to preserve this body, okay? We need to survive. So if it's getting hit from those different angles, it's got to preserve the things that are going to keep it alive. And it's going to go after that muscle mass, the bone, the nervous tissue. It's not going to care about the fat. It's going to get rid of that fat, all right, if you're in that deficit. So I would say it would make it an easy way for you to diet and to build muscle. You got to have the strength training component on things, but you then look at the protein with the amino acids inside that are going to help you build the muscle. That's going to go hand in hand, and it'll help you diet because you're going to decrease the amount of carbohydrates, decrease the amount of fats. One of the reasons why people demonize fat in a diet is because they're higher in calories per gram. 1 gram of carbohydrates, about 4.5. 1 gram of protein is about 4.5 calories. 1 gram of fat is 9. So it's double the amount of calories. So 20 grams of protein, 20 grams of carbs, they're the same calories. 20 grams of fat is double the amount of those. So when you think about the overall calorie intake, if you can lower your carbohydrates and lower your fats, increase your protein while you're strength training, you're gonna get massive benefits. It's gonna be kind of like 2 steps forward, no steps back, because you're gonna be building that muscle, losing the fat, and that's where we want to go in the first place. Whereas if you just diet, you're going to go 1 step forward, 1 step back in regard to the physique side of things. And then you're going to have to build the muscle back up, which might even be harder in that process to build back up, because you might do it by eating more calories, right? And then what are you going to do? You're going to add more excess fat. So if you're dieting, you need to eat that protein to help with the muscle. But if you're strength training, if you're just dieting, then there's no real demand for you to eat. I see people going and I need to eat more protein. Well, you need to eat less if you want to lose weight, not eat more protein. Now, if eating more protein lowers the amount of fat that you intake or lowers the amount of carbohydrates that you intake, and that ends up becoming a calorie deficit, then yes, then you're right, you did. But if we don't take that in consideration, a calorie is just a calorie. So when we think about dieting, we have to think about what's the main objective. We have to get that calorie deficit, or else the body just isn't going to lose. It's just simple physics. Simple, hey, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It just gets transferred. If we have the same amount of energy, it's going to stay the same. So we want to get rid of that energy. We want to make sure that we're in a deficit. Our body burns a certain amount of calories every single day. We eat less than that, and our body is going to lose weight. If you can increase your protein with your strength training, that's going to allow you to build that muscle that you broke down in the strength training sessions and allow you to preserve it so that your body's priority is on the muscle because of that strength training, and you're going to lose even more fat because of it. So that's what I would recommend. I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't necessarily recommend things, but in regard to the science about stuff, talked about this yesterday, got to come with your receipts. This is what your body prioritizes when you lift weights. If you don't, okay, if you don't have the stimulus of training, then there's no demand on the body to keep the muscle, so you're going to lose fat and lose muscle. Whereas if you really hit the weights hard and you get enough recovery in between and you're eating enough protein and you're making sure that that muscle is staying healthy and happy, okay, after the breakdown, you're going to preserve that muscle and your body's going to prioritize losing fat. So I'm going to link to that Dr. Doug McGuff video because he explains it very, very succinctly, and he's got graphs and things for you to look at, whereas I'm just talking about it. But the main idea is a calorie is just a calorie. So if you're dieting and you're okay with losing some muscle mass because you just really want to lose your weight, then by all means, don't strength train. Don't worry about protein because it doesn't matter, right? If that allows you to get in a calorie deficit by eating more protein, then great. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. A calorie is a calorie. You can eat ice cream and lose weight as long as it's in a deficit to your overall metabolic rate. If you're strength training, prioritize protein so that you can keep that muscle mass on and rebuild what you broke down, and you're going to give your body even more of a stimulus to say, hey, let's keep that muscle and let's break down this fat. And then you'll lose weight, but you'll lose the fat, and that's what we really want. If I just told you you're going to lose weight, then and you would still look like a slob, that's not probably what you want. You'd want your body to then have the shape, the tone, and the muscle mass underneath all of that fat once it's gone. So prioritize strength training. Don't worry so much about protein, unless if you are strength training, you got to make sure that you get enough of that, and you got to be in a calorie deficit no matter what you do. So make sure that you're counting your calories, looking and making sure that you're eating the right amount for your goal of weight loss. Most of the time that's 500 calories in a deficit per each day. That'll give you about 1 pound per week, but it doesn't even need to be that extreme, especially if you are strength training, because that muscle building will help you increase your metabolic rate as you go. So at the end of the day, calorie is just a calorie. Focus on strength training. That's what we do when we train. We train hard, we diet, and we get results.